Hi everyone, I am back from a long summer hiatus and I am here today to show you how to make these super easy watercolored pumpkins. I'm going to show you two different techniques on how to make them, and I am going to be doing this tutorial in real time so that you can paint along with me. So let's go ahead and get started. So if you have an orange that you like, you can use that. Otherwise, I am going to mix up two warm colors. I'm going to use a warm yellow, Hansa Yellow Medium, and then I am going to also use Pyrrol Scarlet, which is another warm color. If you are mixing your colors to get an orange, you're going to need both a warm yellow and a warm red to get a nice vibrant orange. If you use cool colors like a cool yellow and a cool red, you'll get a duller orange. If that's what you like, that's fine, but we are going to go for nice and vibrant. And you see how super bright that orange is. I'm going to tone it down a little bit by adding some more of the yellow. And now we can go ahead and get started. Just showing you the consistency of the paint there. And I'm just taking that paint and just dipping it in some water to make a lighter consistency for our first layer of color, and then we'll use the thicker consistency for the second layer. I'm using a size 6 round brush by Winsor Newton. This is one of my favorite round brushes to use, and we're going to start by just drawing a nice pointed oval in the center, and this is going to be the center of the pumpkin. So real easy shape to draw. You don't need to pencil it in first. It's pretty easy just to eyeball. So just make yourself a nice oval with a little bit of a point on the bottom. You could add a little point to the top as well. And then we're going to draw a little C shape coming out from the left side of the pumpkin. And then we're just going to fill that in, leaving a little strip of white in between so that we can define the little ridges on the pumpkin. So you already see our pumpkin starting to come together with just these two simple little strokes, our little oval in the center and then our little C shape. And now we're going to make a backward C on the other side of the pumpkin and then fill that in as well. And we're just going to leave a little strip of white there just to help us to define the ridge. And if you accidentally paint over it, that is perfectly fine. We can fix that when we go to the second layer, but it makes it a little bit easier if you leave it open. And now we have this beautiful bumpy pumpkin. The best thing about pumpkins is that they all come in all kinds of weird shapes, so you don't have to worry if your pumpkin looks a little bit like an oddball, because that's how pumpkins look in real life. Now I'm just going to let some of that thicker consistency orange just bleed into the top and the bottom sections of the pumpkin. This is really up to you where you want to add that extra color, but with watercolor it always looks interesting if you have different different values of color going on. And I would recommend skipping this step. It's sort of like, stirring a pot. You don't need to stir it, but you keep stirring it. And that's kind of what I'm doing by pushing my watercolor around here. It's just, it's best not to do that. It's best just to let the color to seep in where it will. Now we're going to add the stem. I'm using Sepia here. So this is a nice dark brown. You can use any brown that you like. And I'm just going to mix up a pretty light consistency here for our first layer. And I'm just going to draw a curved line for our stem. And you can get as simple or creative as you like here. You can make a windy spiraling stem if you like, or you can just make a simple stem like I'm doing here. Now we're going to draw a little leaf coming off the side of the pumpkin. So I'm using some Sap Green, and I'm going to mix in my sepia to that as well to make a nice olive green. So far we've only used 4 different colors for this pumpkin, and I'm just going to draw a little part of the vine coming off of the stem there, and then I'm just going to lay my brush down nice and thick and flat to make the shape of the leaf, and I'll have it kind of hug the pumpkin a little bit. And then to make the little ridges on the edge of the leaf, I'm just going to pull out little bits of paint there. So I'm just going to make like little spikes. I find that that's easier for me to do than to draw in the ridges as I paint the leaf. I just kind of add them. I cheat, I'd add them at the end like that. And then I'm just going to add in some more sepia here and just let it bleed on the top and the bottom of the leaf just to get a little interest going on. Maybe add some veining, knowing that the paint is pretty wet now, so whatever I do will bleed a little bit. But that's the beauty of watercolor with that first layer, just getting the bleeding going. Now I've dried our pumpkin, and I'm going to start adding in our second layer. So I am using a thicker consistency of sepia paint here, and I'm just going to paint along the edge and the bottom, and leaving some of that first layer showing through so that we get the different values of colors that makes it look nice and interesting. I'm going to dry. And then I'm going to take an even thicker consistency of the sepia, mix it with some of that thick orange we had mixed earlier. And this is going to be our second layer for the pumpkin that we're going to start adding some of the shading and definition. So I'm going to take, now I have a small brush. I think this is a size 2 round brush. And I'm just going to add a real thin line of that thick consistency orange mixed with sepia paint there. And I'm going to take a clear, a brush. This is my size 4, and it has just a little bit of water on it. It's nice and clean. And I'm just going to pull that color out, pull that sepia out just on one side, just on the side that is going towards the left. And now we're going to do the same on the other side. So I'm going to add a thin line of that thickened sepia and orange paint with my 2 brush. Going to take my clean number 4 brush, dip it in water, and then pull that color out. And then I'm going to take some more of that brown. I mixed it with a little bit of the orange, and now we're going to add some shading. And I'm just going to add a little bit of color along that right side of the center. Take my, wash my brush off and just pull out the color with some clear water. And I'm just going to continue that method as I work around the pumpkin, just adding shading wherever it seems like it needs it, like along the bottom edges. I'm just going to lay it in there and then clean my brush off, and then just with some water, just pull that out a little bit. And you want to make sure you let some of that first layer show through, because that's what's going to make it look like they're highlights and just give your painting a lot of interest and texture. So now I'm just taking the orange by itself so that I can add another color into our painting here. I'm going to add some more of the brown mixed with the orange on the other bottom ridge of the pumpkin here. And then clean my brush off and just pull it out with the water. I always dip my brush back onto the, or pat my brush back onto the paper towel just to make sure it's not too wet, so I have some control over the color. And now I'm going to add a little bit of shading to the top with that brownish orange mixture, just kind of dotting it on there, letting it bleed where the other water was that I just added a second ago. And here I'm just looking to get some interesting textures, just really playing around. And now we can start adding a little bit of texture to the stem. So I'm going to take very thick sepia here, straight from the little tin, and I'm just going to add some little ridges here and just darken up the base of the pumpkin stem, being sure to leave some of that first layer to show through so that we have different values, so that we have a real light brown and then the very dark brown over it. And then I'm going to take that sepia again and darken up the veining in the leaf here. And I'm using my really, really small number 2 brush for this. And then I just washed my brush off with some water. I'm going to take some of the sap green now, mix that in with the sepia. It's pretty thick consistency. And I'm just going to add a little bit of color to the top of the leaf and then a little bit to the bottom, just so we have some different values of green going on in our leaf, just to make it nice and interesting. Now I'm going to take a little bit more of the sepia here. And we're going to make some little curly cues. So those cute little curly cues that you see on pumpkin vines sometimes. So I'm just taking really, really thin brush with that thickened sepia, even mixing it with a little bit of the sap green that was already in the dish. And we're just going to make some little curly cues. You could also do this with a pen if you feel more comfortable that way. With that same sepia and green mix, I'm just going to add a little bit of definition along the edges of the pumpkin there, just with a tiny, tiny little bit of paint. And that is it. So that is our first pumpkin. And now I'm going to show you another way to make the pumpkin. So this one we're going to draw. So I'm going to start by just drawing a circle and then a smaller circle near the top there. That's going to be where the little pumpkin stem comes out. And then we're going to draw in the ridges of the pumpkin. So just like you're making a beach ball, that's kind of how I think about it. So you just draw your ridges out. And I want my pumpkin the shape to be nice and ridgy too. So I'm going to build out the edges of the pumpkin as well. So it matches those little lines we drew in. So it looks like our pumpkin is nice and ridgy. And then I'm just going to erase that original circle line that we had. And I'm using Arch's cold pressed paper here, which is a great paper for these little watercolor drawings. And I'm just going to draw the stem in. I decided I want it to be a little curved, so I just added the curved and then erased the original one. And now this is looking good to me. So now I'm just going to erase the pencil lines so that when I paint over it, they're not too obvious. Now I'm going to take buff titanium and I'm just going to mix it into the dish here. And this buff titanium is going to be the base of our pumpkin. So now we're going to make a little beige pumpkin with some little green specks along. So I'm taking my number 6 round brush and I'm just going to add in a base layer all over the pumpkin. I think I had like a little fleck I just scratched off. And you don't have to be too precious here. You can just honestly color in the whole pumpkin. You don't need to worry about even leaving the highlights for this because this buff titanium is going to dry very, very light. So now I'm just going to work a little bit more quickly and just continue adding our little buff titanium base. I'm going to go ridge by ridge on the pumpkin as we move along. The cool thing about pumpkins there are so many different shapes, so many different color variations that you can just have so much fun. And there are so many textures as well. So this is a great project to do if you just really want to relax and zone out, because you really can't make a mistake, because the lumpier or odder that your pumpkin looks, the more true to life it'll be. And you can have pumpkins that are blue, you can have pumpkins that are green, you can have purple accents, you can have a traditional orange pumpkin, you can have a white pumpkin, you can do lots of different styles. So now I am taking that green mix from before, just the sap green with the sepia, and I'm just going to add a real thin line along the ridges that we had drawn in. And while you're doing this, be careful not to lift your brush until you complete the whole stroke, because then the paint will start to bleed, and you don't want that. So just in one fell swoop, just trace over your little ridges there. And now for fun, I had a little bit of Cobalt Teal Blue on my palette, so I took a little bit of that and I'm just gonna mix in just a tiny, tiny bit of that. Just let it bleed in, just to, again, like I'm just having fun with my pumpkin. I just thought it would be cool to add a little bit of, I don't know, a teal blue highlight to it. So now I'm going to dry everything off. And now I'm taking that sepia from before, from the first pumpkin, and I'm just going to draw in the stem. I'm going to leave a little strip of white in the center here, just so we have a highlight on our pumpkin stem. Now I'm going to take some sap green And I'm going to mix up a pretty thick consistency. I'm going to add some sepia as well so that we can make a nice olive green. Nice thick consistency here. And we're going to start adding some details and shading to the pumpkin. So I'm going to start by just drawing a line, just following the ridge. And I'm using my number 4 brush. Set it aside. I'm going to take a clean brush, dip it in water. This is my 6 round, and I'm just going to pull out that green just on one side, just on the side behind the ridge. And then I'm going to add a little bit more pigment and just let it bleed in. And to add texture, I'm just kind of dotting the color along here. And I'm just going to keep dotting in that color. And my goal here is to add some texture as well as shadows. And then I'm going to start with the next ridge, just taking a nice thick, thin layer of the paint, or thick layer in a thin line. And then I'm going to take my larger brush dipped in water that's clean and just pull that color out just on the one side. And then I'm going to add in some little dots there, and it's going to bleed on one end and be more defined on the other edge. And then I'm going to start from the top and work my way through the middle. And now we're just adding like a little design to each of the ridges. And if you've seen, there are like, I don't remember the name of the pumpkin that this is called, but it's, you know, it's like a white pumpkin, and then it has these little green specks in the like little ridge area where I am here. So I'm just going to keep doing that same technique as I work my way around the pumpkin. Just going to add that thin concentrated line of color and then pull it out with a clean paintbrush and some water, and just make a little design as I go along. And the design is going to be nice and defined on one side of the ridge, and then a little bit messier. It's going to bleed in on the other side. And I'm just going to go around the stem there just to deepen up that color. And then we're going to go back to our ridges, adding our nice thick line, or thick paint, thin line. And then I'm going to clean off my brush, pat it dry on the paper towel so my brush isn't too wet when I pull out the paint, and then just keep working my way around. And here I thought it'd be fun to just add a little bit more shading here. So I added some of that looser consistency of paint and just let that bleed in a little bit. And then I did the same on the other side as well. And again, there's no right way to do this. This is just, you're just playing with a design here. You're just having fun. So I'm going to, same technique as before, paint and then pull it out with my clean brush. And then add some little detail, some little flecks there. Do the same to the other side of the ridge. And as you can see, this is really super relaxing and therapeutic to do, because you don't really need to think much. It's just the same motion, you know, just over and over until you get to where the little ridges meet. And then when you're done, you get to move on to the next layer, or you can decide that you're done and then move on to the next painting, or go have a cup of tea or do whatever it is that you like. So, and again, at this point, I'm just having fun, and I'm just adding some little designs and some little shadows. I'm going to darken up the area around the base of the pumpkin stem, because to just make it recede back and to make those little pumpkin ridges kind of pop out a little bit more. And that's really what's going to make our little painting start to come to life, is going to be the contrast between the light and the dark values of color we have. Here I'm just taking a very thick consistency of that olive green mixture and just adding some little dots to the front ridge of the pumpkin there. And now I'm going to take some more of that Cobalt Teal Blue and just add in just a little bit more color here. So I'm just going to add some little lines, and then I might blend them in a little bit more in a second with some clean water. And this is just, again, to make my pumpkin interesting. So I'm going to take some darker olive green here, add some darker green to the front just for interest. And then we'll pull that out. And I'm trying to be careful to leave a nice white highlight right in the center of that front ridge of the pumpkin. Then we're going to add a little bit more of the green here on the other edges. Again, just to make our pumpkin, give it a little bit more contrast, make it come to life a little bit more. And at this point, I'm thinking that the pumpkin looks pretty good. And now I think we can move on to the stem. So I'm going to take that sepia, nice thick consistency, and we're going to start coloring in the stem. So I'm going to add some little just straight lines just to make it look like the little stalk, like a little spiraling stalk of the pumpkin stem. I'll have them curve a little bit. And then we'll have them curve the other way. So it looks like it is bent a little bit. And I'm just going to add a little bit more of the dark sepia at the base. I want to be careful to leave enough of the white highlight there and the first layer of brown so that it looks nice and dimensional. And now I'm just going to add a little bit more shading to the front ridge there and to the back a little bit, just wherever it looks like it needs a little pop. And that is it. So that is our second pumpkin. So we not only did pumpkins in different colors, but we also did them in different perspectives. So the orange pumpkin, you're looking at it straight ahead, and then this green pumpkin, you're looking at it a little bit from the top. And they're both super easy and super relaxing to do. I really hope that you give these paintings a try, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and I will see you again soon in the next video.